pro-life defeat. Ireland votes overwhelmingly to legalize abortion. We have reaction from Ireland and the Vatican. Senate showdown. A report from Indiana where life issues are expected to play a role in the midterm elections. A summit for the faithful. The ambassador for international religious freedom tells us whether Christian persecution will be part of North Korean talks. And a real lifesaver. Why a migrant in France climbed up the front of a building. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 29th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. In what is being called anti-church action, Ireland's constitutional ban on abortion was voted down, paving the way for legal abortion on the Emerald Isle.
Votes in favour of the proposal, 1,429,981. Votes against the proposal, 723,632.
By a roughly 2-to-1 margin, voters in Ireland strike down their Eighth Amendment. Enacted in 1983, it stated, "The state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn," requiring doctors to regard the rights of a baby from the moment of conception as equal to the rights of the mother. Now, provision may be made by law for the regulation of termination of pregnancy. The government of Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar will now propose abortion be legalized in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Some Catholics leaving Mass in Dublin Sunday say they fear the vote will have far-reaching effects.
It won't change how I live, but I think it will change how future generations perceive the value of life. I think that will alter as time moves on.
And others see it as a way for Ireland to distance itself from its roots in faith.
I just think it's time for a change, and the vote represents women in a big way, and the Catholic Church has had more than its fair say in it, and it's time for change.
Joining us now is Tracy Harkin of EWTN Ireland. Tracy, we just heard 2/3 of voters favored repeal of the Eighth Amendment. Early polls showed a closer split. You and I talked about this last week, and that the pro-life movement was cautiously optimistic. So what's the reaction today among pro-lifers?
Well, when the results came out, Lauren, total devastation, total shock. And that shock wasn't just on the pro-life side. I think it was also a very interesting and shocking result for those advocates for repeal as well. The polls, as you say, did show a much closer margin in the run-up to the actual referendum. But certainly a very sad day, a key day in Irish history. For the first time ever in Ireland, unrestricted abortion will be available. And that's a very, very difficult news for us all to hear.
Give us the breakdown of that vote. What role did younger women, millennials, play in passing that referendum?
Well, we know that 87% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted for repeal, so to lift the constitutional ban, a very striking high figure, considering the fact that the pro-life movement was led by many young people, and many young people were involved in that campaign. But when we look at the numbers, sadly, at third-level institutions and from 18 to 24-year-olds, all voting for abortion, unrestricted abortion on demand. Lauren, very, very sad to hear that.
So after,
not surprising in some respects.
Well, let's talk about that. Why is it not surprising to you?
Well, I think the very date of the referendum was very pointedly chosen by Leo Varadkar, because third-level institutions for the past number of years, there have been a lot of concerns raised about the hostility to opposing points of view. The pro-life voices have not been allowed onto third-level campuses. The pro-repealers actually have this thing called a repeal shield around Twitter and also Facebook. So if any pro-life person wants to engage with them and have a conversation about the issue, they're immediately blocked. Young people were telling me that they weren't allowed, they were asked to remove themselves from campuses if they were wearing a no vote badge or a love both badge, and also hoodies were not allowed in canvas if they displayed anything to do with the pro-life message. So we knew that that's a very, very hostile environment for young people to hear a pro-life message.
After the vote, Irish pro-life campaigner Cora Sherlock tweeted that the struggle to defend the most vulnerable has not ended today. It just changed. We fight on. What will the pro-life movement do in response to this?
The pro-life movement is devastated, but they're actually a very energised movement, and they're a very committed movement. We've seen thousands of ordinary people at grassroots level campaign for the no vote. Those efforts will now be redoubled into providing frontline crisis pregnancy services for women in crisis pregnancy. And we really hope that Ireland does not follow the path of other countries where once abortion is legislated, the rates of abortion drastically increase. They will fight very, very hard to preserve a culture of life and providing options.
Thank you so much, Tracy Harkin of EWTN Ireland.
Thank you, Lauren.
The Pope is highlighting the Church's pro-life position in wake of the Irish pro-abortion vote.
La Chiesa è per la vita.
Speaking to a crowd of Catholic physicians yesterday, the Holy Father said the Church is for life, but there is not an official reaction to the Ireland vote to allow abortion. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliette, is the Vatican leadership saying anything about the vote?
Lauren, this morning I spoke with the president of the Pontifical Academy for Life, and here is what Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia told me. He said, "I am not happy for a law which pushes women to help in the dirty game of death," as he called it. He said, "I prefer to stay near them with our friendship, our love, our solidarity in order to help life." Now, he added that what we need in Ireland is a spiritual and cultural revolution, and we need to commit to supporting women so that they are not alone.
Just in the last 20 years, Ireland has voted now for abortion, for same-sex marriage. Pope Francis once compared abortion to organized crime. After the referendum, Cardinal Robert Serra tweeted his words.
Indeed, the Holy Father was speaking over 2 years ago in February 2017, and he said, quote, "Abortion is not a lesser evil. It's a crime. It's wiping out one to save another. And that's what the mafia does," he said. "It's a crime and an absolute evil." Now, that was quickly picked up by the Twitter sphere, and it got over 1,000 retweets, Lauren.
Ireland was once considered the most Catholic country in the world. What are the archbishops saying about this referendum defeat?
Eamon Martin, the Catholic primate of all Ireland, is quoted in the Irish Times as saying on Sunday, "We've elevated the right to personal choice above the fundamental right to life itself." Whereas Archbishop Dermot Martin said, quote, "Ireland is now conforming to a Western liberal democracy, and it appears to have obliterated the rights of all unborn children's right to life."
How big of a blow is this to the Church in Ireland?
This is a severe blow to Catholic life in Ireland, Lauren, but Archbishop Paglia says we need to keep this in the context of the vote. It's very much a reflection, he said, of the selfishness that's pervasive in many Western countries. However, the Church has to keep promoting a new culture of life from beginning to end in all kinds of different situations. And Paglia went on to say that women really need the Church's support, and they must not be left alone in times of difficulty.
Thank you, Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
The president of the Chilean Catholic Church's Commission for the Prevention of Abuses has resigned. Bishop Alejandro Goich says he was too slow to investigate allegations of misconduct. 14 priests in his diocese have been temporarily suspended. Every bishop in the South American country has offered to resign over what Pope Francis said was their negligence in protecting children. Protests turned violent in Nicaragua this week as riot police try to keep the peace. Firefighters responded to a radio station. New acts of violence are reported every day like this fire. Young people are also taking part in the demonstrations, calling for President Daniel Ortega to step down. The Catholic Church had been mediating talks between the government and demonstrators, but they broke down last week. Lawmakers in Portugal are considering whether to allow euthanasia. The country is 81% Catholic, but in recent years has legalized abortion and same-sex marriage. The country's bishops are against assisted suicide and have distributed 1.5 million pamphlets, which say, in part, life cannot be regarded as an object for personal use. Israeli jets bombed Gaza hours after militants fired 25 mortar shells towards southern Israel. Plumes of smoke were seen rising from a Palestinian refugee camp. Tensions have been running high along the Israel-Gaza border. The latest attacks appear to be the largest in 4 years. An American is welcomed home by friends and family after 2 years in a Venezuelan jail. Josh Holt arrived at Salt Lake City, Utah yesterday with his Venezuelan wife. They were both locked in a Caracas jail for stockpiling weapons. Republican Senator Bob Corker helped with the release of Holt. The U.S. government calls the charges, quote, bogus. Republican Congressman Thomas Garrett of Virginia says he will not seek re-election. The lawmaker says he is an alcoholic and will focus on improving his health and renewing his commitment to his family. Garrett adds this isn't an ending for him. Instead, it's a new beginning. 234 Republican House seats are up for grabs in the midterms this fall. Control of Congress hangs in the balance. Pro-life groups are mounting a targeted, boots-on-the-ground campaign to keep the House of Representatives Republican and hold on to the Senate. Indiana is ground zero for one Senate race. Jason Calvey's on the campaign trail there in Indianapolis, where the incumbent Democratic senator is one of the country's most vulnerable. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Yeah, 10 Senate Democrats are up for re-election in states that President Donald Trump won, including right here in Indiana. Senator Joe Donnelly is facing off against Republican challenger Mike Braun. Now, in the past, Donnelly has painted himself as a pro-life Democrat. But today I met some pro-lifers knocking on thousands of doors who say their goal to set the record straight.
I guess let's make our way back this way, hit up 26 and 31.
Indiana native Caleb Britton served 4 years in the Marines. This summer, he's on a new mission to unseat Democrat Joe Donnelly.
Joe Donnelly is spreading a lot of misinformation that he's pro-life when his voting record shows otherwise, and I think that voters have this common misconception that he does vote pro-life when he really doesn't.
The matchup is between Donnelly and pro-life-backed businessman Mike Braun. In the 88-degree sunny suburbs of Indianapolis, college and high school students hit the pavement. They aren't working so much to promote Braun as they are to call out Donnelly and his proclaimed pro-life stance.
He says he's pro-life, but he's done a lot of things that indicate otherwise. He's voted for taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood.
In 2010, while still in the House, Donnelly voted in favor of Obamacare. In 2017, he voted against allowing states to strip Title X funds from Planned Parenthood. But he has voted twice to ban most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. And he voted to confirm Supreme Court conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch. Volunteers say their door-to-door message is more powerful than traditional ads.
We have got to get Joe Donnelly out of his position and get a pro-life senator in that place.
The Susan B. Anthony lists and their team of paid door knockers have already reached 150,000 homes since last October. They tell me they plan to reach 250,000 more before the fall election day. They're targeting, Lauren, conservative households and likely pro-life homes, urging them not to sit out this fall. As you know, midterm elections do much worse in voter turnout compared to presidential election years.
Jason, why do you think the pro-life issue resonates with Indiana voters?
Well, the activists, the door knockers I met today were very proud. They said Indiana is one of the most pro-life states in the country. Just for an example, back in March, the governor here signed 2 major pro-life bills, including one that will allow charges to be filed if an unborn baby is killed in a violent act against a pregnant mom.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvey. Thank you, Jason. The Supreme Court allows Arkansas to restrict the distribution of abortion pills. The ruling blocks an appeal from Planned Parenthood. The state law says doctors who provide abortion pills must have a contract with another doctor who has admitting privileges at a hospital. Students for Life of America hails the decision, saying it keeps common sense, health, and safety standards in place. Coming up, new details about the possible summit between President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Plus, we talk with the ambassador at large for international religious freedom. White House teams work across 2 continents to salvage President Trump's planned meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. After canceling the summit last week, the president now believes both sides are close to making final arrangements. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The White House says a top North Korean official will come to the United States to meet Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. U.S. delegations are also on the Korean Peninsula and in Singapore, where this summit is expected to take place. The preliminary legwork is underway, and the president is hoping it will lead to a successful summit.
Looks like it's going along very well.
In a tweet today, President Trump writes, "We have put a great team together for our talks with North Korea. Meetings are currently taking place concerning summit and more." Kim Young-chol, the vice chairman of North Korea, heading now to New York. "Solid response to my letter. Thank you." Trump sent the letter to Kim Jong-un last week, calling their meeting off, after he says North Korea wrote angry and hostile statements directed at the U.S. But he did leave the door open for Kim to come back to the table.
If and when Kim Jong-un chooses to engage in constructive dialogue and actions, I am waiting.
Now, it looks like summit preparations are back in high gear. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the North Koreans have been engaging. U.S. and North Korean delegations are meeting at North and South Korea's border this week. And White House Deputy Chief of Staff Joe Hagan is making preparations on the ground in Singapore, the proposed summit location. Over the weekend, the president sounded hopeful the summit will remain on schedule.
So we're looking at June 12th in Singapore. That hasn't changed. And it's moving along pretty well. So we'll see what happens.
Another positive sign, Kim Jong-un met for a second time with South Korea's President Moon Jae-in on Saturday to discuss the summit. The White House remains in close contact with South Korean and Japanese officials as preparations for this summit continue. The president will host Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe at the White House on June 7th. Lauren?
Mark, China is North Korea's biggest trading partner. What communication has the U.S. had with Beijing?
The president has said that China could be influencing Kim Jong-un leading up to this potential summit, but recent interactions between the U.S. and China have centered on trade. Today, the White House renewed its threat to place 25% tariffs on $50 billion of Chinese goods in retaliation for what it says are China's unfair trade practices. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. The State Department is calling out North Korea as a violator of religious freedom. They're among the 200 countries profiled in an annual report on international religious freedom. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo unveiled the report this morning, saying the U.S. is committed to promoting religious freedom around the world. Other countries signaled out include Myanmar, China, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. Sam Brownback is the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. He's the first Catholic to fill the role. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
You released a report today, and the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom also has its own report ranking North Korea as the top of the list of the worst offenders. And while the U.S. is negotiating with North Korea, even though they released 3 prisoners, there are hundreds of thousands, up to 120,000 people in labor camps there. So how important is the religious freedom issue going to be in talks with North Korea?
I think it's going to be critical and foundational. And now you're seeing the first actions that the North Koreans are taking in response to the U.S. pressure is releasing a couple of the prisoners, 3 prisoners. I raised the issues of North Korea 15 years ago when I was in the Senate, and I couldn't get anybody to act. And now you're seeing this administration act and put pressure on North Korea and this gulag system that they have It's a terrible situation for way too many people there, and it's hardest particularly on the Christians in North Korea.
Right, where, you're not even allowed to have Bibles or practice in church. Secretary Pompeo announced this morning that the U.S. is going to host a ministerial meeting to focus on advancing religious freedom. And he said it will be focused on action. Are you going to invite North Korea, Saudi Arabia, other offenders of religious freedom, or is it just going to be like-minded countries?
Well, there'll be two groups that will be targeted for the ministerial. One is going to be like-minded countries, because we want to build an alliance, a coalition of the like-minded to push forward religious freedom around the world. And there are a number of countries that will do that. It will also have countries in here that are moving forward on religious freedom, that they've got not a very good track record on it, but they're willing to work on it, and they're showing actual positive steps moving forward. So we're not releasing a list of who all is going to be invited, but those are the categories of the countries that we look forward to working with. And I think this thing is really going to ignite this issue globally, where you've got over 70% of the people of the world live in countries with substantial religious freedom restrictions. We're hopeful of really changing that number.
The Secretary also noted that the situation in Myanmar, where you visited last month, saying that the violence against the Muslim Rohingya minority was the worst. Christians in Kachin in northern Myanmar are also impacted. How will this ministerial meeting actually physically help them?
Well, hopefully it's going to bring global action to bear on Burma, what they're doing. That's ethnic cleansing of a religious minority, at least, and probably far worse when its final determination is made. But we need to work in concert with the global community. And here, too, the Chinese need to start stepping up. They've let this situation take place along their border with a neighbor, and have not done much. Now, recently they started to speak up a little bit on the Kachin. But this is a situation where we need a global response to this horrific situation that's taking place at the hands of the government, and a long-standing effort by this government in Myanmar, the military leadership in particular, to push out these ethnic religious minorities.
One of the challenges, not just there, but for Christians in Iraq, has been receiving the aid that has been earmarked for them. What is the status of the money for the Christians? How long after this summit would it take to get money to Rohingyas and Christians there?
Well, it has been a difficulty in northern Iraq and that Nineveh Plains region. The Vice President made a big announcement on this earlier. That money has been reprogrammed into the minority religious areas, particularly for the Christians and the Yazidis in Iraq. There have been, conferences about how to get it to the operators for as far as the nonprofit groups, the faith communities in those areas. But this has been an adjustment, and it's taken time to get it going. I'm starting to hear about some of the early opportunities that are starting to hear about these funds, but it's just not really fully moved yet, and it needs to move and get going.
Well, we'll be asking you about it.
You've tried to make the government move in a different direction.
Yeah.
Keep doing it.
Okay,
Keep
we
doing
will.
it.
Sam Brownback, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, and I hope your audience prays for all the people that are being persecuted.
Absolutely. Thank you. Up next, he's called Spider-Man, why a migrant in France risked his life. And the Vatican unveils a mosaic to the Blessed Virgin. Officials in Hawaii are confronting fast-moving lava from the Kilauea volcano. Evacuation orders were issued yesterday in Hawaii County. The good news, officials say, there are no reports of any dangerous gases being released from the lava. 82 buildings, including 37 homes, have been destroyed. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, meets with a migrant people are calling Spider-Man. Mamadou Gassama, a migrant from Mali, climbed a Paris apartment building over the weekend to save a 4-year-old who was hanging from the 5th floor. He says that God helped him to rescue the child. The authorities have detained the father of that boy for alleged parental neglect. Pope Francis urges the faithful to move away from thinking about the world and instead walk toward the light of Christ.
Senza libertà. E senza libertà non si può essere santo.
At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father tells the faithful they will know where to find Jesus because his light is in front of us and leads the way. Finally tonight, there's a new addition to the Vatican gardens, and it has added meaning to a Central American country. A new mosaic depicts the Virgin of the Rosary. She is the patroness of Guatemala. The country's embassy to the Holy See sponsored the artwork. The Marian image is so beloved in the Central American country that the entire month of October is dedicated to her. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless.